Hi, in this tutorial I'm going to walk you through Modify Surface toolbar. Okay, so let's just go through features. First of all, we have the Enable checkbox. Modify Surface is off by default. If we enable it, and if we add a water, so let's call this lake, and let's just pick this into the water list. Okay, so we have a lake in the list item, and the template is set to reservoir. We have three options here. We have lake, we have reservoir, and we have pond. I'll walk you through each one of those. So let's generate and see what happens. Okay, so Cityscape has created a reservoir. It has a depth of 6 meters. And you can notice that there's also a water geometry that's been generated. That's because there was a water fill selected. If we uncheck this checkbox and generate again, the water geometry won't be created, and the user has an option to manually create a water geometry. Okay, so let's bring back the water. And you can see that there's -1 meter. The water geometry is offset from the surface down by 1 meter. You can increase that value if you'd like to. Let's move to lake template and see what happens. Okay, so you can see that we just isolate the surface object. A lake has been created. And we also have a water geometry. And the third option would be pond. Pond looks like a lake, but it has more gradual slope. The angle of the slope is less steep. Okay. One thing to notice is that the surface has lake now, but because the curved area is following the surface, it is following the lake as well. So it's something to keep in mind. Typically, you probably need to make the lake inside of the curved area. Probably something like that. And if we generate now, let's render. Okay, so obviously you wouldn't have a lake on sidewalk, so it should probably be grass or sand material. So let's just take the sidewalk, just remove the sidewalk, remove the boards, and let's just generate. Now it's a grass and there's a lake inside. It's a little bit weird, so what we can do is we can add sand material to curved area. I guess it would make more sense. Okay, now we can have multiple water areas. We draw a spline here, circular spline. We can keep our lake as is, and we can create. Let's make it reservoir, and let's call this reservoir. Okay, and let's generate. Okay, so you can see that there's a reservoir here with separate water geometry. Okay, now let's make things a little more complex. Let's just take this larger site and let's create a lake in the middle. Just draw that circle. Call it lake. Let's pick this in the modify menu. Let's enable modify surface first. Let's add the water. Okay, let's make it lake. And let's make it a little bit deeper. Let's make it 12 meters. Generate. Okay. So you can see that it has created a slope and there's a water inside. So again, the way it works is that the actual lake is created on the surface object, the original surface object that we provide to Cityscape, getting modified, but in a non-destructive way, which means that when you enable modify surface checkbox in Cityscape, and when you generate, there's a new modifier applied to surface object, which is Cityscape surface. Cityscape surface stores all the geometry edits and it regenerates it every time there's a change. So if we turn off the Cityscape surface, you can see that we have the original mesh. If we bring it back, you can see that there's a modified mesh with a lake built in. And again, curved area doesn't have any logic related to water areas. It just follows the surface. Okay, so if we go back to Cityscape, you can notice that we have a terrain list at the bottom. Terrain works in a very similar way. Just instead of water, it creates terrain information. We can add the circle. And let's explore our options. In terrain, we have 3 templates. First one, it's a hole. Hole can be useful for creating holes that are going through the whole site. It could be useful if there's a building that has a basement and that just goes through the site, or any other scenarios. Let's just generate and see what happens. Okay, so this is the hole that we just created, which is isolated. So you can see that this hole goes through surface object as well as curved area, because curved area cannot go outside of surface object. Let's isolate the surface object again, and now the Cityscape surface modifier not only keeps the lake information, it also keeps the new hole data. If we turn it off, we're getting the original mesh. Even if you have the Cityscape surface modifier applied, you can still modify the original mesh. You can change the terrain. When you bring back the Cityscape surface, it won't update yet because Cityscape surface is just keeping additional mesh that has the changes incorporated to it. So if you want Cityscape to apply the new changes that you just did to the mesh, you need to regenerate. You can see that it has already detected a change. It has started flashing. Okay. So now I can see that even if you turn off the Cityscape surface object, the mesh underneath is identical in terms of terrain information. Okay, so now what we can do is we can explore what's the other options in the terrain. So we look at hole. We have a berm here. Berm has a height parameter and the slope angle. Slope angle by default is 18 degrees, but again, you can modify it. So this is our, let's just isolate the surface. This is our berm. It's probably a little too low for this site, so we can make it higher. This time we can increase the slope angle. So let's make it 20 meters, and let's make the slope angle 25. Okay, now I can see that it looks very different. Okay, let's explore other options in terrain. saw berm, we saw hole, and then there's a terrain depression, which means that it's very similar to berm, but it just goes inside of surface, just the opposite way. So we can give it a depth 20 meters, and again, same slope angle 25. Let's generate and see what happens. The curved area is just following the surface. So let's go back to surface objects. When you use the modify surface, when it's enabled, again, the Cityscape surface modifier gets applied to surface object. Cityscape surface modifier stores the new generated mesh data as well as mapping information. So if you use modify surface, you don't need to apply any additional mapping to the surface. Everything is created automatically. One more important thing is that if you'd like to modify the surface object, you can do that underneath the Cityscape surface object. We can apply, let's say, edit poly, and if we turn off that Cityscape surface for a second, you can do all kinds of modifications. Again, if we go up and turn off the Cityscape surface, those changes won't be visible yet because it hasn't been generated yet, but it's very important to keep all the modifications under the Cityscape surface. If you apply any kind of modifier on top of the Cityscape surface, it will be lost on next generation. That's just something to keep in mind.